1 year later, Daniel stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city of the Valaxari homeworld. The city stretched to the horizon, a vast landscape of towering structures that curved and spiraled toward the sky like frozen flames. Bridges connected the buildings, thin and delicate, yet strong enough to hold thousands of Valaxari as they traveled between their homes. Gardens hung from every surface, filled with plants that glowed in the light of the twin suns. It was beautiful. It was alien. And somehow, it had become home. Daniel had learned so much in the past year. He had learned the Valaxari language, slowly and painfully at first, but now he could speak it almost fluently. He had learned their customs, their history, their beliefs. He had learned that they were not monsters. They were people. Different from humans, yes, but people nonetheless. They loved their children. They mourned their dead. They celebrated life and feared death. They told stories and made art and dreamed of a future. Without war. Daniel had also learned the truth about the war. It had started 30 years ago, before he was born. A human corporation called Stellar Industries had discovered valuable minerals on a planet at the edge of Valaxari space. They had sent miners to extract the minerals without permission. The Valaxari had asked them to leave. The corporation had refused. And then somehow shots had been fired. The first battle killed hundreds on both sides. But instead of negotiating peace, the human government had declared war. Stellar Industries had powerful friends in the government. They had funded propaganda campaigns that painted the Valaxari as mindless killers. They had blocked every attempt at diplomacy. For 30 years. They had profited from blood. Queen. The Tsar had shared all of this information with Daniel. She had shown him records, communications, evidence that human leaders had buried or destroyed. She had given him the truth, and now he carried it like a weight in his chest. Kira joined him on the balcony. She was taller now, her shell beginning to harden into the deep blue color of adulthood. Her wings were strong and whole, able to carry her through the air for short distances. She was no longer the frightened child Daniel had found in the ruins of Kepler 7b. "You are thinking again," Kira said. Her human speech had improved greatly over the year. She practiced with Daniel every day. "I'm always thinking," Daniel replied with a small smile. "You think too much. Mother says humans are strange because they live inside their heads instead of in the world." Daniel laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind he had almost forgotten how to make. "Your mother might be right." Kira stood beside him and looked out at the city. "Will you go back to them? To the humans?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. He had thought about this question many times. He missed Megan. He missed Commander Morgan, who had shown him kindness even when protocol demanded otherwise. He even missed the Resolute, that old creaking ship that had been his home for so many years. But he could not go back. Not yet. Not until the truth was known. One day, Daniel said, "When the time is right." A servant appeared at the door of the balcony. She bowed her head respectfully. "The Queen requests your presence, Guardian," she said. Daniel had grown used to being called Guardian. It was the title the Valaxari had given him, the official name for his role in the Hive. He was Kira's protector, her teacher, her family. It was a position of great honor. He followed the servant through the corridors of the palace, Kira walking beside him. They entered the Queen's private chamber, a smaller room than the throne hall, filled with soft light and comfortable furniture designed for both Valaxari and human bodies. The Tsara was waiting for them. She looked tired, Daniel noticed. The negotiations had been difficult. Over the past year, the Queen had been working secretly to establish peace. She had reached out to human leaders who were not controlled by Stellar Industries. She had shared evidence of the corporation's crimes. She had offered terms that were more than fair. And finally, after months of careful work, someone had listened. "It is done," the Tsara said. The Treaty of Kepler will be signed tomorrow. The war is over. Daniel felt his legs weaken. He sat down on the nearest chair and stared at the Queen. Over? He repeated. After all these years? After all these years, the Tsar confirmed. The human leaders have agreed to our terms. Stellar Industries will be investigated. The truth about the war's origins will be made public, and our peoples will begin the long work of healing. Daniel did not know what to say. He had dreamed of this moment, but he had never truly believed it would come. Too many had died. Too much hate had been built, but somehow, impossibly, it was happening. There is one more thing, the Tsar said. She walked toward Daniel and placed her hand on his shoulder. The humans want you to be present at the signing. They want to see the man who started all of this. The man who saved a child and changed the fate of 2 species. Daniel shook his head. I didn't do anything special. I just did what was right. The Tsar made the sound that Daniel had learned was a Valaxari smile. That is exactly what makes you special, Daniel Cole. You did what was right when no one else would. That is the most human thing about you. And it is the thing I admire most. The next day, the Treaty of Kepler was signed in a ceremony broadcast across both human and Valaxari. Space Daniel stood at the Queen's side as the documents were sealed. He wore a simple uniform that combined human and Valaxari designs, a symbol of the bridge he had become. Kira stood beside him, her hand in his. Reporters from 100 worlds asked questions. They wanted to know about Daniel's experiences. They wanted to know how a human soldier had become the guardian of a Valaxari princess. They wanted to know what had driven him to save an enemy child. Daniel answered the same way every time. She was just a kid, he said. That's all I needed to know. The months that followed were not easy. There was resistance on both sides. There were people who did not want peace, who had built their lives on hatred. There were protests and violence and setbacks, but there was also hope. Human and Valaxari diplomats worked together to solve problems that had seemed impossible. Trade routes were established. Cultural exchanges began. Children on both sides grew up seeing each other as neighbors instead of enemies. Daniel became an ambassador, traveling between worlds, helping to translate not just words, but ideas. He taught humans about Valaxari culture. He taught Valaxari about human customs. He built bridges wherever he went, and always, Kira was by his side. She grew into a young adult, strong and wise, with her mother's intelligence and her own fierce kindness. She called Daniel her guardian, but the word had grown to mean something more. It meant family. It meant love. It meant the bond that had formed in the ruins of Kepler 7b and had never broken. Years later, when historians wrote about the war and the peace that followed, they always mentioned Daniel Cole. They called him the bridge builder, the guardian, the human who saved the stars, but Daniel never liked those titles. He preferred to remember himself as he had been on that day in the ruins, kneeling beside a wounded child, choosing mercy over hatred. That was all he had done. He had seen someone in pain and decided to help. He had looked past the shell and the strange eyes and seen a living being who deserved kindness. And that simple choice had changed everything. On the last page of his memoirs, written many years later when his hair was gray and his hands were old, Daniel wrote these words. We think of heroes as people who do great things, people who fight battles and win wars and change history. But the truth is simpler than that. A hero is just someone who sees another person suffering and decides to help. That is all. That is everything. And if enough of us make that choice, we can change the universe. He signed his name beneath the words, and somewhere in the vast reaches of space, 2 peoples who had once been enemies continued the long, difficult, beautiful work of building a future together. Kevin spent 3 days as a guest in the royal palace. He was given rooms larger than his entire ship. clothes finer than anything he had ever worn, and food that made him forget every meal he had eaten before. Servants attended to his every need. Officials brought him gifts of gold and jewels and offers of land. Everyone he met bowed to him as if he were royalty himself. He refused all of it. The Zilari did not understand. They wanted to give him everything they had, to repay a debt 3 centuries old. But Kevin kept telling them the same thing. He had not earned these gifts. He was not his ancestor. He was just a cargo pilot who happened to share a name with a hero. Queen Seraphine watched him with quiet approval. They spent hours together, each day, talking about history and family and the strange paths that had brought them together. She told him stories about the years after Daniel Carter's sacrifice, how the Zilari had rebuilt their civilization, how they had sworn to never forget. "Your ancestor did not want fame," she said one evening as they walked through the palace gardens. He was not fighting for glory or reward. He was fighting because people needed help, and he could give it. That is why we honor him, not for what he achieved, but for who he was. Kevin nodded slowly. "I understand that, but I am not him. I have never fought anyone. I have never saved anyone. I just fly my ship and try to stay out of trouble." Seraphine smiled. "Heroism is not about battle. It is about choices. Your ancestor chose to help strangers when he could have run away. He chose courage when fear would have been easier. Those are choices anyone can make, in any moment, in any life." Before Kevin could respond, a guard rushed into the garden with panic on his face. He whispered something to the queen, and Kevin watched her expression change from calm to cold fury. "What is wrong?" Kevin asked. Seraphine turned to him, and for the first time, he saw fear in her ancient eyes. "The Varathians. They have learned that you are here. A fleet has just entered our space." Kevin felt his blood go cold. He knew the name Varathian. He had heard it in history classes, in the stories his mother used to tell. The Varathians were the enemy Daniel Carter had died fighting. They were conquerors and destroyers, an empire built on the ashes of weaker species. For 300 years, they had stayed away from Zilari space, held back by the memory of their defeat. But now they have returned. "How many ships?" Kevin asked. 30 warships, the guard reported. "They are heading directly for the throne world. They will arrive in 6 hours." Kevin looked at Seraphine. What do they want? The queen's face was hard as stone. "They want you, Kevin Carter. Your ancestor destroyed their fleet and broke their invasion. For centuries, your name has been a symbol of their humiliation. If they kill you here, on our homeworld, they will prove that humans are nothing special. They will prove that the legend of Daniel Carter was just a story." Kevin understood then. He was not just a cargo pilot anymore. He was a symbol, whether he wanted to be or not. His life had become a weapon in a war he had never chosen to fight. "I should leave," he said. "If I go, they will follow me. Your people will be safe." "No." Seraphine shook her head firmly. "They would catch you before you reached the border. And even if you escaped, they would attack us anyway. They are using you as an excuse, but their true goal has always been our destruction. They want revenge for what your ancestor did." "Then what do we do?" Seraphine looked at him for a long moment. "We fight." The next 6 hours were chaos. The Zilari fleet assembled in orbit around the throne world. Dozens of warships preparing for battle. Kevin was taken to a secure bunker beneath the palace, surrounded by guards who would die to protect him. He watched the preparations on a large screen. Feeling helpless and useless, Commander Lyris came to see him before joining her ship. She was wearing battle armor now, her face calm and ready. "You should be proud," she said. "The fleet has not fought like this in generations. They are fighting for you, for your name, for everything your family represents." Kevin felt sick. "They are going to die because of me." "They are going to die for what they believe in," Lyris corrected. That is the greatest honor any warrior can ask for. She touched his shoulder gently. Stay safe, Kevin Carter. Survive this. That is how you honor their sacrifice. She left, and Kevin was alone with his thoughts and his guilt. He watched the battle begin. The Varathian fleet was massive and powerful, their ships dark and cruel. The Zilari fleet was smaller, but they fought with desperate courage, throwing themselves at the enemy with everything they had. Ships exploded. Communications crackled with screams and orders and prayers. Kevin watched it all, his hands clenched into fists, tears running down his face. People were dying for him. People were dying because he existed. He thought about his ancestor, facing impossible odds above this same planet 3 centuries ago. Daniel Carter had not hidden in a bunker. Daniel Carter had flown into the enemy fleet and given everything he had. Kevin looked at the guards surrounding him. They were ready to die for him. Everyone on this planet was ready to die for him. And he was hiding underground like a coward. I need a ship, he said suddenly. The guards looked at him in confusion. Sir, you are to stay here. Those are the Queen's orders. I am not asking for permission. Kevin stood up, his voice harder than it had ever been. People are dying up there because of my name. I will not sit here and watch. Either give me a ship, or I will find one myself. The guards exchanged uncertain looks. They had orders to protect him, but they also believed in everything he represented. A Carter was asking to fight. A Carter was asking to join the battle. One of the guards nodded slowly. There is a fighter bay beneath the palace. Old ships, training craft. They are not much, but they fly. Kevin moved toward the door. Show me. As he walked through the tunnels, Kevin thought about what he was doing. He was not a soldier. He had no combat training. He could barely fly his cargo ship without crashing. Going into that battle was suicide, but he could not hide anymore. He could not watch others die while he stayed safe. If his name meant anything, if his blood meant anything, then he had to prove it. Not because he wanted to be a hero, but because it was the right thing to do. The fighter bay was small and old, filled with dusty ships that had not flown in years. Kevin climbed into the cockpit of the least broken-looking one and started the engines. The controls were different from his cargo ship, but the basics were the same. He lifted off and flew toward the battle, toward the fire and death that waited above. Kevin Carter was going to war. The Zilari patrol vessel was called the Starlight Song. It was a small ship with a crew of 20, tasked with watching the border and helping travelers in need. Commander Lyris had served on the vessel for 8 years, and she had answered hundreds of distress calls. Most of them were routine. Broken engines, lost navigation, fuel problems. She had seen it all, but she had never seen anything like this. When the distress signal came through, Lyris was on the bridge, drinking her 3rd cup of morning tea. The communications officer, a young male named Torrin, was the first to hear the message. He played it once, then played it again, his scales turning pale. Commander, he said, his voice shaking. You need to hear this. Lyris set down her tea and listened. The voice was human, tired, and slightly annoyed. The ship was called the Wanderer, and the pilot's name was Kevin Carter. For a long moment, no one on the bridge spoke. Every Zilari child knew the name Carter. It was taught in schools and sung in songs and carved on the walls of the most sacred temple on their homeworld. Daniel Carter had saved their entire species. His sacrifice was the foundation of their modern history. And now, Carter was calling for help. Lyris ordered the ship to change course immediately. She contacted the Central Command on Zilara Prime and reported what they had found. Within minutes, the message was spreading across Zilari space. A descendant of Daniel Carter had returned. The promise made 300 years ago would finally be kept. The Starlight Song reached the Wanderer in less than an hour. Lyris stood at the airlock, her heart beating faster than it had in years. Behind her, her entire crew had gathered, their faces filled with hope and wonder. They were about to meet someone from the bloodline of their greatest hero. The airlock opened, and Kevin Carter stepped through. He was not what they expected. He was a thin man with tired eyes and messy hair, wearing a worn jacket covered in engine grease. He looked confused and slightly embarrassed, the way any stranded pilot might look when rescued by strangers. "Thanks for coming," Kevin said. "Sorry for the trouble. My engine just gave up on me. I can pay for the tow, but it might take a while to get the money together." Lyris stared at him. This was the descendant of Daniel Carter, the man who had burned like a star to save their people. And he was apologizing for the inconvenience. Behind her, someone in the crew dropped to their knees. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, every Zalari on the ship was kneeling before Kevin Carter, their heads bowed in reverence. Kevin's confusion turned to alarm. "What are you doing? Please, stand up." "I did not do anything." Lyris remained standing, but only because protocol required her to speak. Her voice trembled as she addressed him. "Kevin Carter, descendant of Daniel Carter, hero of the Crimson Nebula, savior of the Zalari people. You are welcome in our space. You are welcome in our hearts. And you must come with us to the throne world. The Queen must see you." Kevin shook his head. "I think there has been a mistake. I am just a cargo pilot. I haul supplies for a living. I am nobody special." "You are Carter," Lyris said simply. As if that explained everything. It took 3 hours to convince Kevin to leave his ship and come aboard the Starlight Song. He argued that he needed to stay with the Wanderer, that his cargo was important, that he had schedules to keep. The Zalari assured him that his ship and cargo would be taken care of. They would repair the Wanderer for free. They would deliver his cargo themselves. All they asked was that he come with them. In the end, Kevin agreed because he did not know how to say no to people who were crying with joy at the sight of him. The journey to the throne world took 3 days. During that time, Lyris told Kevin everything. She showed him the recordings of his ancestors' final battle, the transmission where Daniel Carter announced his name before his suicide run. She showed him images of the temple on Zalar Prime, the prayers that were spoken in his family's honor, the books that had been written about human courage. Kevin watched and listened in silence. He had known he was descended from a war hero, but he had never understood what that meant. He had never known that somewhere in the galaxy, an entire species remembered his ancestor as a god. "He saved us," Lyris said, her voice soft. "When we were helpless, when we were about to die, he gave everything he had to give us a chance. We promised that if his bloodline ever returned, we would repay that debt. We have waited 300 years for you." Kevin did not know what to say. He was not a hero. He was not brave or strong or special. He was just a man who flew a broken ship and tried to pay his bills. The weight of his ancestors' legacy felt too heavy to carry. But as the days passed and the throne world grew closer, something began to change inside him. He read the histories of his ancestors' battle. He saw the faces of the Zalari crew when they looked at him. He began to understand that he carried something precious. Whether he had earned it or not, on the final day of the journey, Kevin stood at the window of the observation deck, watching Zalara Prime grow larger against the stars. It was beautiful, a world of silver and green and soft blue light. Millions of people lived down there, and they all knew his name. Lyris came to stand beside him. "Are you afraid?" she asked. Kevin nodded. "I do not know how to be what they want me to be." Lyris smiled. Daniel Carter was not trying to be a hero. He was just a soldier who saw people in danger and chose to help. That is all any of us can do. We cannot choose our ancestors. We can only choose who we want to be. Kevin thought about her words as the ship began its descent. He thought about his ancestor, flying a broken ship into certain death because it was the right thing to do. He thought about the Zilari, who had kept their promise for 300 years. And he thought about himself, a nobody cargo pilot about to meet a queen. The ship landed in the capital city, and the doors opened to reveal a crowd of thousands. They were cheering and crying and reaching toward him with desperate hope. Zilari soldiers formed a path through the crowd, leading to a great palace of silver stone. Kevin Carter took a deep breath, straightened his dirty jacket, and stepped out into a world that had been waiting for him since before he was born. He was not ready for this. He knew that. But he also knew that his ancestor had not been ready either. Daniel Carter had faced the impossible with nothing but courage and a willingness to try. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps it was all anyone could ask for. Kevin walked forward, and the crowd parted before him like waves before a ship. The throne room of Zilara Prime was the largest enclosed space Kevin had ever seen. Its ceiling disappeared into shadow high above, held up by pillars of carved silver that seemed to reach toward the stars. Thousands of Zilari filled the hall, nobles and officials and common people who had come to witness history. They stood in perfect silence, watching Kevin walk toward the throne. The throne itself sat at the far end of the room, raised on a platform of white stone. It was made of the same silver metal as the pillars, its surface covered in delicate patterns that caught the light. And on the throne sat Queen Seraphina VII, ruler of all Zilara. She was old. Kevin could see that even from a distance. Her scales had faded from bright gold to a soft cream color, and her body was thin with age. But her eyes were sharp and bright, watching him approach with an expression he could not read. Kevin's heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He was still wearing his cargo pilot uniform, stained with engine grease and worn from years of use. Around him, everyone wore fine robes and polished armor and jewels that sparkled like stars. He felt like a beggar walking into a palace, which he supposed was not far from the truth. A Zilari official walked beside him, whispering instructions. When you reach the base of the throne, stop and bow. Do not speak until the queen speaks to you. Do not approach the throne unless invited. Do not. The official stopped talking because something unexpected was happening. Queen Seraphine was rising. A gasp went through the crowd like a wave through water. The queen had not risen from her throne for any visitor in 30 years. She was too old, too fragile, too important to stand for anyone. Ambassadors from great empires had come before her, and she had remained seated. Leaders of worlds had begged for audiences, and she had not moved. But now, for this unknown human in dirty clothes, she was standing. He has come, she said, her voice echoing through the silent hall. After all these years, he has come. Kevin stopped walking. He did not know what to do. The official beside him had dropped to his knees, along with everyone else in the room. Thousands of Zilari knelt before him, leaving only Kevin and the queen standing. Seraphine descended the steps from her throne, moving slowly but with purpose. Her attendants tried to help her, but she waved them away. She crossed the floor of the throne room alone, her golden robes trailing behind her like sunset clouds. She stopped in front of Kevin and looked up at him. She was shorter than he expected, her body bent by age. But her eyes were filled with something vast and deep, a memory that stretched back centuries. You look like him, she whispered. Not exactly, but there is something in your face. The same kindness, the same quiet strength. Kevin did not know what to say. Your Majesty, I'm not. The queen shook her head and took his hands in hers. Her skin was cool and dry, her grip surprisingly strong. I know who you are. I know who he was. And I have waited my entire life to thank your family for what was given. She turned to address the crowd, still holding Kevin's hands. 300 years ago, I was a child. I was the youngest daughter of Queen Seraphine IV, barely able to walk, too young to understand the danger we faced. When the Varathian fleet came to destroy us, my family fled in a transport ship. We thought we were safe. Her voice grew heavier with memory. But our ship was damaged in the battle. We drifted, helpless, as a Varathian cruiser came to finish us. I remember my mother holding me, crying, saying goodbye. I remember thinking that the stars outside our window were very beautiful. She paused, and Kevin saw tears forming in her ancient eyes. And then I remember fire. A human ship, burning like a comet, flying straight at our enemy. The cruiser tried to turn, but it was too slow. The human ship struck it and destroyed it, saving our lives. She looked at Kevin again. But before that ship hit, before the fire took him, Daniel Carter did something else. Our escape pod had been damaged in the attack. It was filling with smoke, and the door was stuck. I was trapped inside, crying for my mother. And Daniel Carter, in the last minutes of his life, came to our ship. He pulled open the door with his bare hands. He lifted me out of that pod and carried me to safety. The crowd was weeping now. Kevin felt his own eyes burning with tears. He could not stop. He did not just save our people, Seraphine said. He saved me. He held me in his arms and told me not to be afraid. He told me that humans would always protect those who needed protection. And then he went back to his ship and flew into the heart of our enemy. She released Kevin's hands and slowly, painfully, lowered herself to her knees. I have ruled this world for 60 years, she said. I have knelt to no one. But I kneel to you, Kevin Carter, because your ancestor gave me the gift of life. Everything I have done, everything I have built, every child I have raised, and every law I have written exists because a human I never knew chose to die for me. Kevin looked around the throne room. Every face was turned toward him, filled with love and gratitude and hope. These people had kept their promise for 300 years. They had built temples and sung songs and taught their children about a human who had saved them. And now they were kneeling before his descendant, asking nothing in return. Please stand up, Kevin said, his voice breaking. Please, everyone, stand up. The queen rose with the help of her attendants, but her eyes never left Kevin's face. You do not understand yet what this means to us. But you will. You carry his blood, and that blood is sacred to our people. Whatever you need, whatever you want, it is yours. We owe your family a debt that can never be repaid. Kevin thought about his broken ship, his empty bank account, his small and unremarkable life. He thought about his ancestor, who had never asked for thanks, who had simply done what needed to be done. I do not want anything, he said quietly. Daniel Carter did not save your people for a reward. He saved them because they needed saving. If his blood means anything, then let me try to be worthy of it. Not by accepting gifts, but by earning them. Queen Seraphine smiled, and in that smile, Kevin saw the little girl who had been carried from a burning ship. You are very much like him, she said. He would be proud of you. She took his arm and led him toward the throne, toward a seat of honor beside her own. Come, she said. Tell me about your life. Tell me about your world. I have waited 300 years to meet you, and I want to know everything. Kevin walked with her, still stunned, still confused, still unable to believe that any of this was real. But somewhere deep inside him, something was waking up. A sense of purpose. A sense of belonging. He was Kevin Carter, descendant of Daniel Carter. And for the first time in his life, that meant something. The battle above Zilar Prime was unlike anything Kevin had ever seen. Ships burned in the darkness like fallen stars. Weapons fire cut across the void in streams of deadly light. Wreckage tumbled through space, and through it all, the two fleets tore at each other with savage fury. Kevin's fighter was small and weak, compared to the warships around him. His weapons were training lasers, designed to mark targets rather than destroy them. His shields were thin, his armor was thinner, and his flying skills were terrible. He should have died in the first minute, but something strange happened when his ship appeared on the battlefield. The Zalari fleet saw him. They saw the identifier on his ship, the name Kevin Carter broadcast across every channel. And they went mad with courage. "Carter is with us!" The cry went up from ship to ship. "Carter flies! Carter fights!" The Zalari fleet pushed forward with renewed strength. Ships that had been retreating turned to attack. Pilots who had been ready to die found reason to live. The sight of a Carter flying into battle beside them filled them with fire that nothing could extinguish. Kevin did not understand the power of his presence. He was too busy trying not to crash into things. His fighter spun and dove through the battle, dodging debris and weapons fire more by luck than skill. He shot at enemy ships whenever he could, but his weak weapons barely scratched their hulls. It did not matter. He was there. He was fighting. And that was enough. The Varathian commander saw him too. Admiral Draven was an old warrior, the grandson of officers who had died at the Crimson Nebula. He had spent his entire life hating the name Carter, dreaming of revenge for his family's defeat. And now a Carter was flying right toward him in a tiny ship. "All weapons. Target that fighter," he ordered. "I want him dead." The Varathian flagship turned its guns on Kevin's ship. Beams of energy cut through space, seeking him out. Kevin dove and twisted, his heart pounding, his hands shaking on the controls. He felt heat wash over his ship as a beam passed too close. Warning lights screamed at him from every direction. "I am not going to make it," he muttered to himself. "I am really not going to make it." But then, Commander Lyris was there. Her ship swooped in front of him, taking a hit that would have destroyed his fighter. She was followed by 2 more Zalari ships, then 5, then 10. They formed a protective wall around him, shielding him with their own bodies. "Keep flying," Lyris called over the comm. "We will protect you. You will die." Kevin shouted back. "Then we will die with honor." "Keep flying, Carter." Kevin pushed forward, his protectors falling around him one by one. He watched Lyris's ship take hit after hit, its hull burning, its shields failing. She stayed in position until the last possible moment, until her ship was nothing but flames. "For Daniel Carter," she said as her ship exploded. "For Kevin Carter? For humanity." Kevin screamed. He pushed his engines to maximum and flew toward the Varathian flagship, tears blinding him, rage filling his heart. He did not care about living anymore. He did not care about survival. He only wanted to make them pay. His weapons were useless against the flagship's armor. His ship was too small to do any damage. But he had one weapon left. Himself. Kevin aimed his fighter at the flagship's command bridge and accelerated. The Varathians tried to shoot him down, but the Zalari fleet threw themselves in the way, sacrificing ship after ship to give him a clear path. Admiral Draven saw what was happening. He saw the tiny ship flying toward his bridge, saw the Carter name on its hull. For the first time in his life, he felt fear. "No," he whispered. "Not again. It cannot happen again." But it was happening. Just as Daniel Carter had done 3 centuries ago, Kevin Carter was flying into certain death to destroy his enemy. History was repeating itself. Kevin closed his eyes and thought about his ancestor. He thought about Queen Seraphine as a child, carried from a burning pod by human hands. He thought about Lyris and the Zalari who had died believing in him. He thought about what it meant to be a Carter. "This is Kevin Carter," he said over every channel. "I am coming for you." His ship struck the flagship's bridge at full speed. The impact sent shockwaves through the massive vessel. Systems failed. Fire spread. Admiral Draven died in the explosion. His last sight the same thing his grandfather had seen 300 years ago, a Carter flying into the heart of his defeat. But Kevin did not die in the seconds before impact. A Zilari rescue shuttle had locked onto his ship. It was impossible, a maneuver that should not have worked. But the pilot was a young officer who refused to let another Carter die alone. She pulled him out of his fighter just as it struck, dragging his unconscious body to safety as the world turned to fire around them. When Kevin woke, he was in a medical bay on Zilara Prime. His body was covered in bandages. His lungs burned from smoke, but he was alive. Queen Seraphine sat beside him, holding his hand just as she said Daniel had held hers. "You did it," she said softly. "The Varathian flagship is destroyed. Their fleet is retreating. You saved us again." Kevin tried to speak, but his voice was weak. "Lyris." "The others?" Seraphine nodded sadly. "Many died. They will be remembered forever. But their sacrifice was not wasted. You gave them something to believe in, Kevin. You gave them proof that the legend was real." Kevin closed his eyes. He thought about all the people who had died for him, all the lives spent to keep him alive. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a survivor, unworthy and broken. "I did not do anything special," he whispered. "I just flew. I just tried. That is all Daniel did." Seraphine squeezed his hand. "He just tried. He just flew. And he changed the universe. So have you." Weeks later, after Kevin had healed, he stood before the temple of Daniel Carter. It was a beautiful building of white stone and silver metal, its walls covered in carvings that told the story of the Crimson Nebula. Millions of Zilari had walked through its doors over the centuries, seeking inspiration from the human who had saved their world. Today, a new wing was being dedicated. A new name was being carved beside the old Daniel Carter. Kevin Carter. Kevin watched the ceremony in humble silence. He still wore his old cargo pilot jacket, patched and cleaned but never replaced. He still did not think of himself as a hero. He was just a man who had made a choice when it mattered most. Queen Seraphine stood beside him, her ancient face glowing with pride. "What will you do now?" she asked. Kevin looked up at the temple, at the names carved in stone. "I think I will go home," he said. "Back to Earth, back to my ship. I have cargo to haul." Seraphine smiled. "The universe is lucky to have you, Kevin Carter." Kevin returned her smile, smaller and sadder. "The universe is lucky to have people who remember, who keep their promises for 300 years. That is the real miracle." He left Zilara Prime the next day, flying his repaired ship back toward human space. Behind him, the Zilari watched him go, their hearts full of gratitude and love. The legend of Daniel Carter would live forever. But now there was a new legend too, a reminder that heroism was not something you were born with. It was something you chose, and somewhere in the stars, a cargo pilot flew on, carrying the weight of 2 names and the hope of 2 worlds. Kevin Carter. Just a human. Just a man. That was enough. That was always enough.